This is September 15th, 2021. And the election is 4 or 5 days away, I guess. And I think it would be wise to ask yourself why the Liberals called the election. I don't think that the simple explanation that it's all about ego and power is quite right. I think that that's part of it, but I think actually that the reason he called the election now is because he's afraid, and so is the Liberal Party. And I'll get into why I think that. So they had to call the election at the right time, because inevitably what's going to happen is that he's going to experience some popularity due to the fact that he just splashed so much money around. People like to receive money, and that made him more popular, no doubt. Even if you don't think yourself that you like him more, in a way you kind of do, I think. People just like to get a check in the mail. But he had to time it in such a way that he was popular for that, but not totally unpopular for the inflation that it would cause. Because those two things are inevitable. You print a lot of money, you borrow a lot of money, you give it away, you're going to become more popular. And eventually that's going to lead to inflation, and then you're going to become less popular. I don't think that he timed it very well, but we'll see. I think Canadians are feeling the effect of inflation really hard. But you just don't get to hear that much from just regular Canadians. And he's also afraid of going back into Parliament in a minority position, because what he's essentially done is he's shut down the parliamentary process. So we had no parliamentary oversight into how the money was spent, and neither did he fund the Auditor General. So he had whatever amount of money it was to splash around, like $500 billion almost, I think. But he didn't have the money to pay the Auditor General. And really, just look this up. This is not nonsense. The Auditor General has been complaining for a long time that the government has not been giving her enough money to keep track of the way that the government is spending money, while they're spending more money than any Canadian government in history. So when they get back into Parliament, people are going to be asking, where did the money go? How did you decide? They won't say it, but I will. He spent a lot of it on affirmative action programs. Maybe not directly, but he campaigned as the one that's all about identity politics. He's going to stand up for women and people of color and all that. Don't know the mechanism that he used to make sure that he funneled money to those identity groups, but I find it very hard to believe that he didn't. But who knows? It's like I said, we haven't had oversight, so I'm just going to go ahead and guess that's probably the case. He had no reason to call the election other than those two reasons, I don't think, because he already had support from the NDP. He was already doing everything he wanted to do. Is there anything new? Jody Wilson-Raybould herself has come out and written a book, and I imagine that book is going to detail the ways in which Justin Trudeau violated the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary, which should that disqualifies him from being Prime Minister, or it should. Just that alone. I think that that's probably his biggest scandal. The only one that's more significant, perhaps, is the way that he paid off the media. uh, I think it was they're doing a sort of a roast or a press party or something, and he had a little joke. He said people were arguing that the press was giving him an easy time on issues. They weren't coming out and criticizing that seriously, for no good reason. He gave them a lot of money, and now he's getting in trouble, and they're going easy on him. And he said, well, no, they had a good reason to go easy on me. It's because I paid them. And so that was supposed to be a joke. But a joke isn't funny unless there's an element of truth to it. There's definitely an element of truth to that. People might say, well, look at all the bad press he's gotten. But the press that he's gotten would have been a lot worse if he hadn't paid them off. I think that there's going to be a certain percentage of the journalistic community that's going to say, look, I resent being paid off in that way, and now I'm going to come down really hard on you. So if he only wins a minority, or not even that, then the things that are going to be written about him over the next few years are going to be incredibly tough. He wasn't smart enough to be the Prime Minister of Canada ever. He wasn't experienced enough, and he didn't value democracy. What he valued instead was diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those, to quite an extent, violate the basic principles of democracy. I talked about this. If you're masochistic enough to want to watch my videos, you can see I talked about that a lot before. So what's going to happen when people get the idea, okay, Jody Wilson-Raybould has come out and detailed this, so obviously there's a problem. People respect Jody Wilson-Raybould. But the question that's going to be in the back of their mind is her criticism going to increase or decrease affirmative action benefits? And it will definitely increase them, because she's both Aboriginal and female, so she stepped on her head. Now he has to prove that he's actually a feminist and whatever, non-racist. And the best way to do that, the easiest way for him to do that, is to borrow money and print money and spend it. As in previous elections, the most multicultural place in the world, the GTA, is going to have an inordinate amount of influence on the election because of the way that the ridings are distributed. You might want to look into that, but that's absolutely true. That's why they always say you can't win the election without winning the GTA. It's a place with a lot of immigrants, and the way that the election is set up, their votes count for more than people who aren't immigrants, because it's so immigrant rich, right? There's people that aren't immigrants, and their votes count for more too. But that's the way that it works, and that's how he thinks that he can win again. He's afraid of the criticism that's going to come his way over the money that's been spent. And you would think that he would be afraid of the anti-democratic things that he's done, as he's when he was Prime Minister. Okay, so a while ago what I did was I compared the similarities between woke politics and religion. And that's the first of these videos, actually. So if you want to go back to that, that's there. I think it's the most comprehensive treatment of that subject that I've ever seen. But it's not detailed. To detail it, you'd have to be an academic. Okay, so then I just thought, well, maybe this would be funny, because I've heard suggestions to this effect that what would really be interesting is to look at the similarities between wokies and Nazis. And that'll get, oh my God, you're going to compare me. You think I'm a wokie, probably. Might want to define wokie. Okay, you're a wokie if you'll vote for Justin Trudeau again. You got to be. He's King Wokey. He has a messiah complex. He wanted to be head Wokey of the entire world. He probably still does. Okay, so anyway, I just thought that it would be interesting to compare Wokies and Nazis. Okay, so something that I just put this at the top just accidentally. But one of the things that the Nazis were really against was just the sort of generalized degeneracy. Most people wouldn't know that, but especially Berlin was like the whorehouse of the world, because the conditions that were set on Germany after the First World War plunged them into poverty, and they had no choice but to go into prostitution. And the Nazis didn't like it. The Nazis are nationalistic. The Nazis were white supremacists, and not just white supremacists, but German white supremacists. They didn't like seeing their women and men and children hoored out to the world. They didn't like it. Wokies, there's no racist thing about it, and I think it might be too much to say that they're pro-degeneracy. But it definitely isn't too much to say that there's a lot of degeneracy around that they don't complain that much about. So, if you feel you're a Wokey and I'm describing you, well, there's a lot of characteristics that make up a Wokey. And there's probably people I would call Wokies who think that it's gotten just as disgusting as I do, or as a lot of people do. I'm not saying that I understand the depths of anybody's soul. But Wokies are pretty cool with degeneracy. Okay, another difference is Wokies are multiculturalists and Nazis were white supremacist nationalists. Big difference. Wokies are pro-abortion rights. Nazis were big on abortion, but they would force it on people that they didn't think were going to produce the right kind of offspring. Educated. When I wrote it down, I put educated with a question mark. The intellectual thought leaders of the time are leading the Wokie movement, and it was the intellectual thought leaders of the time that led the Nazi movement. And they were a lot smarter than the current batch of so-called academics and intellectuals. Going to do this quick. I doubt I'll be able to get through it in my 15 minutes. Wokies are socialists. Nazis were socialists. Definitely, okay. Socialist, censorious. Definitely censorious. Propagandistic. Definitely both. So if you're a Wokie, there's ways you can distinguish yourself from a Nazi, and there's ways that you have to admit that you're like them. Socialist, censorious, propagandistic, politically violent. The whole thing is pushed by academics and intellectuals. Ethnicity determines identity. So your identity is based on the color of your skin, your language background, your sex, sexuality. That's where your identity comes from. Exactly the same as the Nazis. Anti-Semitic, critical of capitalism, critical of objectivity and rationality. You get BLM types, what is it called? Critical race theory types. They criticize rationality and science. The Nazis did too, okay? So that's a thing. Critical of capitalism. The current bunch make more money through the capitalist system than the Nazis did. So I don't think the Nazis were quite as hypocritical about it. A lot of support from elementary school teachers. The Nazis had a ton of it, so do the Wokies. The Nazis wanted strong men. The Wokies want strong women. So is that a difference or a similarity? I guess it's both. Collectivist. They're both collectivists. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means later. They both believe that a small number of activists can change society. Okay, this is going to take two.